Today, we're going to catch up with ourselves, Richard Doyle and Mike LaFleche. We'll talk about, what led us here to, be here on this podcast. We'll also talk about, the kind of history of, where we've come from, where we're going, and where we are now. We'll also be showing the Onshape featured model of the week. Very popular one. You might have seen it before, but if you haven't, it's the most incredible Onshape design I've ever seen. It's got all sorts of tricks in it, so we're going to have fun looking at that. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun today, Richard.
Yep, I think so too, Michael. And I hope our listeners are ready for a nice long story, because my story actually begins in high school. And it goes back to my involvement with our STEM classes, which at the time, and I guess this is going to date me, STEM consisted of mechanical drafting classes, wood shop, metal shop, and in some cases, auto shop. I fell in love with mechanical drafting in the 9th grade, my first year in high school, and I convinced the teacher to allow me to take 2 classes of mechanical drafting every year for all 4 years that I was in high school. And it actually turned out to be a great thing, because that's what started my career. I'll never forget Bob Lombardi, the instructor, and he encouraged me. He encouraged me to enter my drawings into the county fair, where I actually won a participant ribbon. Yes, we had those back then as well. But it led me to my career, because as soon as I graduated high school, I was perusing the local newspaper and ran across an ad for a drafter trainee. And I thought, well, that's for me. It was a small company at the time, about 50 employees, a little company called Electroscale Corporation. So I went up for to apply for the job, and they handed me a clipboard with a 3-dimensional object on it and a test. Please draw 3 views of this 3-dimensional object, which I did very easily. After all, I had 8 classes of mechanical drafting. I pretty much knew what I was doing. But at the bottom, there was a series of lines, and they were asking for your best hand lettering. Remember, this is back before computers. We're talking paper and pencil
Richard,
here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what were you designing on? You were on a drafting board at this point, right? I mean, we
Exactly.
have gray hair, so,
Yep. So anyway, they sat me on a couch with this clipboard, and like I say, I did the 3 drawing views. That was pretty simple. But when it came time to do my best hand lettering, I was having trouble balancing the clipboard on my leg or finding a place to put it. And I really didn't feel like I was presenting my best work. So instead, I scribbled a note at the bottom of the page and asked them if they'd be willing to see some of the work that I did in high school, so that they would understand what I could really do. Well, it wasn't long after that I got a phone call and I got the job. And during my first week there, I was talking with the lead draftsman. We were taking a little break in the lunchroom. He kind of laughed for a second. He looked at me. He said, "You know why you got this job?" And I had assumed it was because they liked my work. But no, as it turns out, the boss thought an 18-year-old kid that had the nerve to write that kind of a note on a job application might be worth looking at. And that's why I was hired.
Interesting.
So I spent a couple of years with that company. I learned an awful lot. Being the young guy at a company like that, you tend to learn things that maybe you don't want to learn, but later in life, you realize that was a good thing. I learned how to put drafting tables together for each of the new older hires. I learned printed circuit board design. I was the only one that volunteered to go to the class to learn printed circuit board design as an 18, 19-year-old kid. And after that, for the next 4 months, I spent my days 8 hours at a time staring at a light table connecting traces and pads. And it was a fantastic work. It was like working a puzzle all day. You put your head down at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 5 p.m. you look up and say, where did the day go? And it was just fantastic. So I really enjoyed my time with that company. Unfortunately, a family situation came up and forced me to relocate to Montana, which actually that turned out to be a good thing too. Montana in the late 70s, early 80s, there wasn't a lot of manufacturing and wasn't a lot of engineering going on up there. So I found a couple of odd jobs, and then ran across another ad. And I guess this is something for our younger viewers. Read the paper, look at ads, look at want ads. If you're looking at that kind of, for that kind of job. This was a training class that they were offering free of charge, a 1-week training class to learn something they called records posting. Kind of a subset of drafting, if you will. It's actually underground utility type drafting, mostly telecommunications. And they were offering 3 jobs to the top 3 people that finished the class. And I was fortunate enough to finish first. And that set me on a 5-year path of traveling around the country doing contract work for various telephone companies. So I spent time in Wyoming. I spent time in Colorado. I spent time in Wisconsin. I went to Texas. I went to Arizona. We were doing 2-month, 3-month, sometimes 6-month contracts. And I eventually worked my way up to be the owner's right-hand man, which really just meant that I loaded up the drafting tables into the U-Haul truck in Montana and drove them to wherever we were setting up the office to do the contract job. I got to hire the people locally, or sometimes, they had to come in from different areas, and I got to run those jobs.
Question for you.
So
how long, what's
yes.
the fastest time you've had putting together a drafting table?
Oh, goodness. It's been a long time since I've done one, Michael. I would say after I was experienced, it probably took an hour or less.
Okay, so it's about the same amount of time as installing CAD software.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and not only that, not only the drafting tables, but there were other little things that I learned how to do too, like running a blueprint machine. Most people will never have to run a blueprint machine in their life. So I'm one of those people that's fortunate enough to have that skill if it should ever arise.
Was this one of the ammonia driven ones?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the first, when I first got that job, we were in a very small building. And the drafting room, we had about 12 drafters in there, along with the blueprint machine. So when that thing was humming, even with the exhaust fan, it was a little nasty. We eventually moved into a nice big building, and they built a separate room for the blueprint machine. But I also learned that, design, it takes a lot of knowledge for design, but it's also the knowledge of where to find the information. And a lot of our young listeners won't understand this, but we had a library, and, instead of going to Google and doing a search, we went into the library and we searched through index cards for the manufacturer that we were looking for, or the parts that we were looking for. And you would haul these big, huge books out to your desk, and you would spend hours researching things. So, having the internet to do that kind of thing these days is pretty valuable. But back to my story. So after about 5 years, my traveling career came to an abrupt halt when I got married. Because my wife didn't like the idea of moving all over the country for 2 or 3 months at a time. And I guess I could understand that. But it was kind of funny. The day after we got back from our honeymoon, I got a call from the man that I had been doing work for. He said, "I've got an opportunity for you in California. Would you like to go?" So I looked over at her and smiled, and we talked about it. And she agreed. So we moved down to California. And that's where I picked up CAD. We were doing a contract job at an IBM plant site in San Jose. And according to the rules of the contract, all of the engineering personnel needed to know IBM's CAD system, which at the time was something called CADM. So I learned how to run a big black and white monitor with a light pen and a function keyboard. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, I had done a lot of hand drafting work, and this was something new. This was something exciting. They gave us a 40-hour class, and it turned out great. And again, it was something that I learned that I didn't really need at the time, but turned out to be a great thing, because when that contract ended, as I was looking for a job, I found a company called CDI Corporation, who just happened to be doing a lot of work for IBM, and they used CADM. So, of course, I got hired on there and spent a couple of years doing more CADM work. When the Navy came to CDI and said, "Hey, we've got a project that we'd like to do up in the Bay Area. It requires something called AutoCAD," which at the time none of us had really ever heard of. So we grabbed a demonstration disc, and I locked myself into an office for a couple of days and learned how to use it just enough to get the bid package put together. And sure enough, we ended up getting that project. So all of a sudden, we had to go full steam into something new, into 2D CAD on a PC. And it turned out to be a great thing. And so we finished that project. And after about a year or so, they decided to sell that operation. So they sold everything except me and my digitizers and my programs that I had put together for underground utilities, and shipped me off to Boston, Massachusetts, where I spent the next couple of years working for various telephone companies. I think at the time it was New England Telephone or 9X, something like that. A quick aside, I was actually in Denver, Colorado on Divestiture Day when AT&T officially broke up, but that's another story altogether. So after a couple of years in Massachusetts, I got a call from somebody that I had worked with in California that said, "Hey, Texas is booming right now. You need to come to Texas." So I packed everything I had into an old station wagon and drove myself down to Texas, again for another CDI affiliate. And I was running their 2D business for a little while there. When that job ended, actually just before that job ended, we had gotten a new contract for a company called DTM Corporation, who were making industrial size machinery, something new called 3D printing, or at the time it was called rapid prototyping. So I got in very early stages of the rapid prototyping industry, helping to design their beta machines, DTM Corporation's beta machines. Sometime later, I got a call from their head engineer who asked me to come to work for them directly, and I agreed. And so I spent a couple of years doing AutoCAD work with DTM. And we were getting ready to roll out a new machine when the product development team came to me. I was the designer, the drafter, the document control guy. You know, I was the guy without the engineering degree that did all of the work they didn't want to do. And I enjoyed every minute. Don't get me wrong. I loved, still to this day, love doing mechanical
I hear you.
drawings.
I was one of those guys too.
Yeah. Yep. So the product development team came to me and said, "We're going to design a new platform from the bottom up, and we want to use 3D to do it." And I scoffed. What do you mean 3D? We don't need that. I can do anything you want in this 2D program here. But they insisted. So we took a look at a couple of the newer 3D packages. SolidWorks turned out to be the choice that we made, and so that was my first real entry into the 3D design world. And it was shortly after we started using that somebody recommended that I start a user group. I didn't even know what a user group was at the time. I had never really done that. I'd been to a couple of conferences, but nothing that I would call a user group. And I thought, well, okay, let's give it a try. So I put together my first meeting at a quaint little place in San Marcos, Texas, with a beautiful view of the gardens. I went to H-E-B and I got plates full of sandwiches and sodas and ice and all kinds of great things, and picked up all the paperwork. And I had arranged for one of our engineers at DTM to come down and talk about rapid prototyping, all of the different technologies. So I told him, I said, no sales stuff. I said, this is informational. You can't be selling any machines here. I don't think anybody brought their $500,000 check with them anyway. So we want to hear about that. And the night turned out to be great. I mean, we had great presentations. We had good food. There was great camaraderie. Everybody thanked me as they were leaving. And I got a good feeling about that. But the next day I got an email from one of the attendees, and it was an engineer that had recently been laid off. It wasn't really his fault. The company folded. And he ended up sitting right next to the owner of a contract engineering firm local in town. And apparently he was there to try and recruit a new mechanical engineer. They were sitting right next to each other. I mean, it couldn't have turned out better. So the email he sent me was so appreciative. And he told me that he would never miss another meeting, and frankly, he never did. He continued to come to those meetings until I no longer ran that group. And it opened my eyes to something. Yeah, I enjoyed design. I loved using CAD. I loved being the bottleneck at the company because everybody had to come to me to get stuff done. But there was something about the feeling I got running that user group that made a big shift in my life. It really changed my life. So I continued to run that group for a couple of years, and got a phone call from another company one day that asked me if I'd like to be part of a national board that would kind of bring all of the user groups together under one umbrella, and I readily agreed. Spent some time with the company, spent all day with the company. We talked about it. That's how we ended up forming the SolidWorks User Group Network. So I'm proud to say that I was one of the founding members of that organization. We weren't getting the kind of support that we needed from the company. We were very dissatisfied at the time, and I brought that to somebody's attention, and he asked me, well, what should we do about it? And so I smiled and said, I think you need to have one person that is responsible for user groups around the world that can be the key focal point that can get things done. He smiled back and he said, do you happen to know anybody? So that started a 14-year or so run of managing user groups around the world. I traveled to hundreds of user group meetings. I traveled to dozens of different companies. I enjoyed every single minute of it. I loved the shaking hands. I loved sharing the pizza or breaking bread with folks. And it's funny, even while I was doing all of that, I was still a regular CAD user at the time. Whether it was creating my own models for presentations or just doing some fun kind of side work, looking around the house saying, oh yeah, I think I could model that. Because I wanted to keep my skills sharp. It makes sense that somebody that's responsible for providing technical content to user groups should know the technical content that's being provided. So I enjoyed keeping up with CAD, and I really enjoyed my time with the user groups. So a few years ago, about 3 years ago, I decided I was tired. My children had grown. I was an empty nester. I loved the Las Vegas area. I was living in Austin, Texas at the time. I've been visiting Las Vegas a couple of times a year for the last 20 years anyway. And I thought, well, this is a good time to make a move. I'm tired. I'm getting a little bit older. Maybe it's time to just settle down, semi-retire in the desert. And so that's what I did. So I packed up all my stuff. I moved out to Las Vegas, settled in, found a couple of small jobs here and there. I wasn't really concerned. I had saved a bunch of money, so I was just looking forward to taking it easy for a while. And I had remembered Onshape from a long time ago, of course, knowing John Herstick and John McElhenney for so many years. I was always curious about what they were doing, but I was doing something else at the time, so I didn't really pay attention. So I contacted John McElhenney, and I said, hey, I'd like to take a look at Onshape. You guys think you could hook me up? And I told him, I'd be happy to do some social media, talk about my experiences, that kind of thing. John said, yeah, sure. Let's see what you can do. So one of my goals in life, later in life, is to live in a tiny house of my own design and my own build. So that's what I started doing with Onshape. I started designing my tiny house, and I picked up Onshape very quickly. There were so many things about it that were so much better than any of the other previous softwares that I had used. Mate connectors. I mean, I could talk about mate connectors for hours and hours and hours. It was one of the most fascinating things I saw from Onshape. So I was happily plugging along, designing my tiny house, and John called back, and he said, Richard, how would you like to help us set up a user group network for Onshape? And, again, Michael, I was, I was tired. I initially told him no. And I can't believe it. I mean, and John, I'm sorry. I should have said yes in the first place. But things changed, and I got back in touch with John. I said, okay, John, let's do this thing. And it turned out to be the most wonderful thing that could have possibly happened. I'm having so much fun with the Onshape user groups. Now with this podcast, the Onshape community is fantastic. I've met some great people at the user group meetings. Of course, the employees, I know several of them personally for many, many years. I've met some great people on my first trip back to the PTC headquarters last month. So, I look back and when I think I wanted to semi-retire, maybe that was true back then, but I am so glad that I heard from John. I'm so glad that I picked up Onshape and so glad that they agreed to allow me to do this again. So
yeah, we're so happy to have you. I mean, it's been great, seeing that community build up. It kind of feels like the good old days. There were good days, back,
it
back
does. And
we started,
Yep. And of course we do things a little bit different with the Onshape user groups. We're 100% online. We started out with live groups, And I had a lot of uptake with that. We had 27 groups form within the first 6 months that I came on. And then of course COVID hit, and that pretty much shut down everything. But it gave us an opportunity to really learn how to do online user groups very well. And I think we've come up with a great way of still allowing for the networking, still allowing people to meet each other, get to know each other, without having to do the travel. We don't, the user group leaders they don't have to arrange for food. They don't have to find a venue. All of that can be easily taken care of. We work with a 12-member advisory board, user advisory board, and they're all fantastic. They all help out with scheduling meetings, with finding technical content, meeting ideas, that kind of thing. So yeah, we're 100% online. On occasion I miss the handshakes. I miss sharing pizza. But I think down the road somewhere we'll be doing some live events, and I expect once the pandemic is really over, I can see a big Onshape conference some year, where we all get together. I'll set up the receiving line and I'll shake everybody's hand in the room. But for now, I'm happy with the online groups, and I hope that our customers are too.
Yeah. I've been to several and presented at several, and it's always there's always something new that somebody learns, and
Yep.
and I think you bring that up at every user group that you run, that you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to learn something new when you come to the session. You're going to meet somebody that's going to help you. There's lots of really good reasons to attend these meetings.
Yep.
How would somebody find out about these user groups? Is there a place that we can look?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll put that up on the screen at some point here. But yeah, go to the Onshape website, onshape.com. Bottom of the page, you'll find a link for user groups, and that's where you'll find the calendar. You'll find some information about the advisory board, the names of the folks that are helping us out, and also a nifty little video that I did a couple of weeks ago that's posted now, that talks about the Onshape user groups and where we're going with those.
Great.
So, I hope people take a look at the website, take a look at the video, and join us at a user group meeting. They're really easy to attend. We have at least one per week, sometimes two. We try to vary the time zones so that people on the East Coast aren't up past midnight, and people on the West Coast don't have to log in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
So, plenty of opportunities for around the world. We even have a couple of German speakers that hold meetings in German language, also in French. So lots of opportunities.
Ooh la la.
So that's my story. I know it's a long one. I hope it wasn't too boring for anybody. And now I'd like to hear about your story.
Yeah, Richard. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're kind of birds of a feather. We have a similar background with how we kind of arrived where we are in the CAD world today. I went to a technical high school, growing up in central Massachusetts, and that school, even before that, even in my grade school days, I went to a Catholic school and everything. We had I had Sister Ann Carroll. She was my drafting teacher in 6th grade. You would have a drafting class every month or so.
St. Anne's in San Francisco up until 2nd grade.
Oh well. I can't believe how many coincidences there are in this story. There'll be a few more probably. I really just loved the drafting. I had a drafting table at home. My grandfather got me a drafting board, and I was able to do things. It was really architectural when I was a younger person. When I got into the technical high school I went to, I started getting into more of the mechanical stuff. We started on a drafting board. This is the early 90s. CAD had been around a little bit for a while, but it was still very expensive. Of course, schools really couldn't afford, lots of different CAD stations. But we did have this row of 4 computers in the back of the room near the ammonia blueprint machine that we all enjoyed hanging out near. And the 4 CAD workstations were AutoCAD workstations, dual screen. I think it was AutoCAD version 4. I had a big pen plotter as well, which was beautiful. Those pen plotters, they made the most beautiful prints, didn't they?
The first time I ever saw a pen plotter was actually during that printed circuit board class that I took. It was an HP that actually used felt tip pens. Yeah, and at the time was just amazing technology. We couldn't stop watching
it. It was beautiful, and I that was just it was awesome being able to use that technology. Like, like the colors in AutoCAD, like color 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like they all matched the pen plotter numbers and everything. It was, everything, like if you look at how CAD is now, it all comes back to those days when they were designing the interface and the layer system to work with the pen plotters. It was really fun to be part of that. But I was still a drafting board guy. I loved doing my lettering. I loved, making the isometric views and everything by hand on the drafting table. It was really nice. And I kind of scoffed at the CAD system. It didn't seem very fun to me, but,
the output was the same for everybody.
Right. There was no distinction.
With the hand drafting, you had your own style. You had your own artistic, look and feel to some of the drawings.
Exactly.
And computers took that away from us.
A little bit. Maybe that was my reasoning, but at some point, they were able to upgrade the CAD systems, and we went, we upgraded the machines. There were DOS machines with AutoCAD 12 running in DOS, and that was like my first like real serious foray into CAD. I immediately got into 3D like as soon as I could with AutoCAD. AutoCAD 12 had something called the AME Solids, and they had a little render extension, the RenderMan extension, and you could, build these 3D models. And I completely was like sucked in, like it was like a black hole. I was like in front of a CAD system all the time. I got a computer for home. I got the best computer I could possibly buy in 1994 or whatever. I had won some contest where I got a 50% coupon at the local electronics store. So I spec'd it to the tilt, I had a 1 gigabyte hard drive. I had, I had a good amount I had 32 megabytes of RAM. I mean, that at that time, that was incredible.
I remember my first upgrade from a 286 computer to a 386 computer because the software I was running required a math coprocessor.
Exactly.
And I was blown away by the speed.
Yeah, those math coprocessors were great. I spent the time installing my AutoCAD at home, 32 floppy disks, 3.5 inch disks. So that took forever. It took probably longer to do that than to assemble a drafting table. And then you had to keep feeding the disks into the computer to install this thing. And then you'd go to acad.exe and you'd launch your AutoCAD and you'd be all good to go to draw your lines. I would do all my homework in class for like my trig homework in AutoCAD, and I would be sailing through class. Hopefully I don't get in trouble with my teacher. They actually, they enjoyed that I did that actually. So I think I got a little extra credit on that, but I loved school. I loved the technical school. Everything that I know today, it's because they set me down that path with my instructors. I think Sister Ann Carroll, I think, Ray Willett, who was the main drafting teacher, and they put me to work too. So at this technical school, once you're a junior in school, they could put you into the real world, and you would go, instead of going to drafting class, you would go 1 week to your regular academic classes, and then the following week you'd go to your drafting class for the week. So it was an immersive
great opportunity.
And instead of going to drafting class, I would just go to work at a company in Worcester, Massachusetts, central Massachusetts. They made drop forgings, investment castings. And I was there as a drafter, and I was working on the quoting and proposals for the investment casting side of the house. Investment casting is where you take a, let's just pick a part off the screen here. I have this Logitech mouse, 3D mouse here, but let's say we're doing an investment casting of the metal piece. You would need to figure out the volume of that. You'd need to figure out how many ports would be needed to feed the metal into it, and then you'd make a wax pattern of that, and then you'd take the wax pattern and then dip it into this slurry, and it would like form this coating over it, and it would look like a tree. You would print, it was almost like, doing a batch print 3D printing job nowadays, but, you would, put like 12 or 20 of these things on a tree, and you'd cast them all at the same time. You'd pour into this empty, you'd get the wax, you'd get the slurry, then you'd burn out the wax, and then you'd pour the metal into that. And that's the investment casting process. And And that was my job, was to just do the quoting, to tell, to get the quotes from the mold shop that would make the wax mold for us, which was a very expensive mold. I would go back and forth between the mold shop and drive back and forth and get, the high importance molds that we needed to get into the production right away. So they would send me off to get those parts. So it was great, working with the supply chain, understanding that. And this is a young kid, as I'm 17 years old at this point.
And I imagine, kind of like myself, when I started early as a youngster, as a young person in the company, you probably volunteered for everything you could, right?
Yeah.
So that you could learn anything you possibly could. So
I'll tell you what, they took advantage of that as well with me, and they made me the CAD manager of all of their. They tried. They needed to find some way of filing things, coming up with custom forms and things like that. And I was doing this quoting in CAD Key. This was like the CAD system I was using at the time. CAD Key is, at the time, was probably like the second most popular CAD system.
Yeah, I remember it well.
They did 3D wireframe very well. They were ahead of AutoCAD, I think, with that. And I used AutoCAD or CAD Key. And I enjoyed using CAD Key because I actually won a seat of CAD Key in some design competition. I was the state drafting champion for 2 years in a row, and they gave away a seat of CAD Key in the design competition. So I actually had my own copy at home, and I would use it as well. So I already had a good understanding of it. But yeah, they put me in charge of that, managing that system. We only had 2 or 3 engineers on that side of the business. On the other side of the business, on the forging side, they also put me in charge of their stations for CAD. But their stations were quite a bit different. They weren't DOS CAD Key. They were Unix workstations, right? They were running computer vision CADS 5. This was the big time, right? CADS 5, this is $500,000 workstations and software. And, when you say I'm going to buy a seat of CAD, I think it comes from those days. Because when you bought your computer vision CAD workstation, you got the bookshelf of books, you had the big desk. It was like, this is a workstation. You're going to sit down and do your CAD work in this office purpose built for doing CAD. And we had all the special equipment. It was really a pleasure to be part of that side of it. Learning CADS 5 and the advanced 3D modeling, and then the Unix system administration. You're making sure all the backups and all the command prompt stuff that you'd have to go through to back up everything on optical disk and everything. It was, we had 75 megabit optical disks that we were backing things up on for all of our work. And it was really a gratifying part of my job was doing that, I thought, even though it sounds so silly now.
In my early days, we had reel-to-reel tape that did that.
That's right. That's right. So we were really fancy with these optical disks. They were like rewritable CDRs before they were a thing. And like you said, the young people on this, like recordable CDRs. What are you talking about? But anyway, worked there. Great. I had some life situations that got involved. I got married very young and had my son very young, and needed to keep working. So I just I worked for a couple other manufacturing companies in the area after my gig was up at the Drop Forging and Investment Casting Company. At one of these places, still in central Massachusetts, there was a company making mobile equipment for the military. So they would make, if you ever been on an aircraft carrier, you'd see those red and white kind of fire trucks that run around that look like a golf cart almost, but they're very powerful and they can put out a fire. There's lots of stuff that can go wrong on a aircraft carrier.
Sure.
They also made like the steam catapult systems that would help the fighter jets take off. But they also made this thing called what's called a flush capping system, I think they called it. And this was a cement mixer that could cap a NATO standard crater, which was a 30-foot diameter crater, 10-foot deep. There's always standards for all these things,
Sure.
So that, if a runway was bombed out, they could go send the cement mixer in, fill it in, and then 30 minutes later have, fighter jets landing, on this bombed out runway. So it required very special mixture, very, computerized deployment of, how the mix was generated. It was a big, huge piece of equipment, 10,000 piece assembly. And it was really quite a lot of fun to work on because that was the first time I actually used SolidWorks. So the company I was working for had a seat of SolidWorks laying around. Nobody was using it. It was SolidWorks 95. And I was like, this is amazing. I became a cult leader, I think, like just telling everybody.
I know what you mean.
I was like, this is amazing. Here's, you got to see this, you got to use this. And I just, of course I ended up being CAD manager there too at that company and, getting us to use it more and everything. And it was really an incredible thing. And my local value-added reseller had a job opening. I had become very good friends with them because I was, going back and forth all the time, asking questions. They were coming to our company because I was building 10,000 piece assemblies, and at that time that was huge. And but eventually I took a job with that local value-added reseller for SolidWorks, and that was late 90s at this point, and I was sucked in. Once you're in the CAD world, it's hard getting out, I think. So go in knowing that if you're going to work in the CAD world. But I enjoyed it, wholeheartedly. Worked there for 10 years. Worked for another local value-added reseller for another 5 years after that. There was general shakeup of the industry,
Sure.
about 5-10 years ago, where the local value-added resellers were kind of in a consolidation market. But really, it was really a fun time to go to companies, to businesses, helping people understand the benefits of 3D CAD and parametric design, and helping companies get their PDM set up, and
presenting at user group meetings.
I've probably presented at 100+ user group meetings over the years with SolidWorks. I eventually left being a SolidWorks value-added reseller and took a job in the real world as a CAD manager at a real manufacturing company again. And at that point, I was like, oh, well, now that I'm not a reseller, I can, run a user group. So I, for 3 months, I was running a user group until I joined Onshape. I think I got one meeting out, when I was the Boston North user group president. But Onshape was happening. I knew it was happening. It was a thing that was, I knew the old team, from SolidWorks was putting together this new system, cloud-based software as a service style CAD. And the very day it came out, it was someday in March what year was that? It was 2015, I think it was. The beta was released to the public. And I was one of the very first ones to hit the buy button and get myself Onshape, and I started blogging about it, and I just, it was like the old days again. It was like I was that cult leader guy back in the old days of SolidWorks, and I just couldn't look back. I quit my job. I was gonna start my own consulting business, and I would be using Onshape. But before that actually really happened, John McElhaney, he was, president of SolidWorks, founder of Onshape, called me and like, why don't you just work here? Okay. So I went in. Call. And it was great. We really didn't have a sales team or a technical team. We were just, trying to figure out what was going to work, right? Because this was a new thing, having software as a service CAD, trying to figure out how to get in front of the right people and answer questions that people have about it. And I was part of that back in the old days at Onshape, and it was a very fun time. Every day was unique, different, and fun. So I've been doing this for the last 7 years now at Onshape, in various roles. And the thing I like the most is just helping people understand, what the possibilities are, and helping walk down that path with people kind of side by side. It's really an amazing thing that we have at Onshape. We have lots of customers that tell us it's really changed the way that they can get their work done. So it really is gratifying being part of Onshape here.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Well, you were right. There are an awful lot of parallels in our stories. I mean, I think I had about a 15-year jump on you. So you still have a lot of years to add to your legacy. So
yeah, we'll see if I move to Vegas at some point. We'll see.
There you go.
Speaking of Onshape just a little bit, what I would like to do is introduce the featured model of the week. The featured model, or it might not be this week, but the featured model that we're going to bring up here today is something that I would like to do for every one of our podcast episodes to show what people are up to in Onshape, and if it's of course it's a public document that I'm going to share, and we have permission to share it. So let me just share my screen. There we are. And what you're going to see here is the winner of the Onshape Live Design Competition that we had back in, I think it was March of 2021. And this design is really incredible. It's it looks like just a regular room with a standing desk. This is the whole thing was to create a work from home environment. And in this work from home environment, you just wanted to have the most baller setup possible. That was like the goal of the design competition, right? We were a little tongue in cheek. Everybody, is sick of working at home sometimes. Maybe not. Maybe I have a good work from home setup. This one I would certainly like working in here on the screen here. But the thing that makes this really interesting is some of the things they did to this design to make it really work in a really cool way. We asked that they use a robotic arm in some way in the design competition. And look what happens here. As I move this along the track, the track is if I zoom in just a little bit there, you can see that it's one of those, screw-fed, roll, tracks, right? And it's going to move along. And you see it's actually moving everything, right? As I move this back, the motor is actually the thing that's moving it. But look what's moving on the screen. That Tesla is actually moving. So this is actually a haptic input device that they designed to control the screen right here in Onshape. I couldn't believe how deeply, they thought about this. And they did this in 3 hours.
Wow, that's amazing.
3 hours. Oh, and so that's really what I wanted to show today. And Alnus Smidgens, who designed this, we actually we're going to be having him on, right, Richard?
Yes, I am so excited to interview this young man, young Alnus Smidgens, as he's become known. He's been interning with Onshape over the summer. The kid he's already a legend in the Onshape community, and he's under 20 years old. Just an amazing young man. He's done some user group meetings for us. He's done a lot of work at Onshape. I think people will be really thrilled to hear this young man's story. I know the more I learn about him, the more fascinated I get with this kid. So I'm really looking forward to talking with him on the next episode.
Yeah, he has lots of stuff that we'll be able to talk about. He's done some incredible work, so we'll be able to focus or highlight some of those things. It's really cool. So,
and we'll get to hear it directly from him. So, well, I sure hope people enjoyed our stories today. I think we're coming to the close of the podcast here. Like I say, next podcast is pretty exciting with Alnus. We'll have a couple of surprises for you as well, and hope you end up having some fun. Michael, any last words for our listeners?
Oh, yeah, subscribe and share this. We're excited to get the word out about Onshape and about the Innovator Insider podcast. It's really, I'm excited. That's all I have to say.
Yep. Me too. Should be a lot of fun. Yeah. Michael, great. It's been great being with you, and I look forward to the next show.
All right, great. See you next time.
All right.